Hello, everybody. I'm Dr. Duke, and this is The Takeaway. We bring back again our good friend Alex Newman. Alex is a Crackerjack correspondent, writes some really, really important articles, and you got two for us today, Alex. Let's start with what's going on in universities in San Diego with regards to white privilege.
Well, thanks very much, Duke. It's a pleasure to be here again. And this one, it's almost not shocking anymore. But what happened here was a professor, Professor Day Elliott, professor of sociology, quote unquote, handed out this worksheet to her students about how to determine your level of white privilege. And it turns out there's not only white privilege, there's also gender privilege, sexual orientation privilege, religion privilege, and then the students were challenged to think of other ways they have privilege, such as, I don't know, maybe being born human, maybe being born in the United States. I don't know, who knows what exactly they were thinking. But they had this big whole list of things that the students were supposed to see if they have privilege. And I really encourage people to go to the article and read it for yourselves, because this stuff is mind-blowing. Can you find Band-Aids that match your skin color? That's evidence of your privilege. Can you buy, BY, posters with people who have the same amount of melanin content as you? That means you have privilege. Can you find music of people of your race? That means you have privilege. And so, it's never considered that maybe we're just part of the human race and maybe, we don't have to worry about these things. So it's an extreme document. I mean, just obsessed with race. In my opinion, it's a very racist document. I mean, anybody who focuses so obsessively on race and particularly demonizing one race has real problems with racism. But this is what passes for education in the taxpayer-funded institutions of alleged learning today.
It is amazing, and you're absolutely right. It is racist. Can you imagine the idea of Mexican professors in Mexican schools, colleges, forcing their kids to come to grips with their Mexican privilege, or Chinese professors in Chinese universities getting their Chinese students to apologize for their Chineseness? It's just absolutely unbelievable. The other thing that blows me away is that these professors, these elitist professors with their advanced degrees, there is never any such thing as progressive privilege. Your privilege is a progressive professor on a progressive university campus and all the ways that allows you to ride roughshod over everybody else. There's never any such thing as professorial privilege, right? There's never any such thing at all as the kind of collectivist, absolutely empowered progressivism and its isms, the way it shuts down discourse, the way it prejudices students against other students, the way it reinforces discrimination, segregation, separatism. It doesn't bother them in the least. They control the shots. And when these professors start pushing this garbage, to push back against them is then considered racist. So talk about skewing the demographic their way in every possible way. It's sociology, right? What bothers me, and you talk a little bit about this, Alex, is the degree to which sociology now has become the dominant way we're doing all humanities courses. We kind of expect this from a sociology professor, but go to take an English class on a college campus. You're going to get the same race class, white privilege garbage there. Go to a art history class, go to a history class or a philosophy class. The entire humanities is morphing into one big sociological experiment at the expense of real knowledge and learning in history and culture, and all of it has to do with privilege, white privilege, male privilege, again and again and again, the same repeated tropes.
And, unfortunately, it's not just on the, insane asylums that we refer to as universities today. I wrote a couple of weeks back over at FreedomProject in the Newman Report, they were doing this to little 9-year-old children in North Carolina, right? They had, talk about terrorizing and abusing these poor little kids. They would have them come stand up in the front of the classroom, and they were forced to apologize for their white privilege and their Christian privilege and their male privilege and, their economic advantage privilege and all these other things. And, parents spoke out. But unfortunately, this is the type of abuse that's being financed with taxpayer dollars in government-funded institutions of alleged education all over this country. And you have to wonder, what kind of lunatic or poor misguided soul would send their children to some kind of place like this where they're going to be abused and harassed and made fun of and bullied over their race or their religion or their gender. I mean, it's just mind-boggling. And then you add to the fact that, some parents are going into debt, some kids are going into debt, hundreds of thousands of dollars to go receive this alleged education. And you wonder, what person in their right mind would send a child to a place like this?
Well, from academic bullying to tone-deaf media, the second article you wrote really ties into this as well. We have the Atlantic magazine, a very important, prominent, progressive magazine, lamenting the fact, the reality, that more and more parents, because of this kind of garbage, this indoctrination, this bullying, all of this race baiting, many moms and dads are abandoning the government schools, the public schools. And the Atlantic sees it. At least the left-wing media is beginning to acknowledge the exodus. And yet, in spite of all that, the Atlantic came up with all sorts of reasons why you should keep your kid in government schools. Talk about that article, Alex.
It really was incredible, and in fact, I'm encouraged by it. Just a few months ago, the New York Times had an article trying to demonize critics of government schools and making the most ridiculous argument in the world that criticism of government schools is actually racism. But so the Atlantic had this new article, and to their credit, they recognized that people are abandoning their trust in government schools. People don't want their children brainwashed and dumbed down in these institutions anymore. But then the Atlantic goes on to make really a half-baked case for why that's a mistake and why people should continue subjecting their children to this kind of insane abuse. And if you actually read the article, I mean, almost all of the points that they argue as evidence for why we need government schools are actually incredibly powerful evidence for why we need to get our kids out of there immediately. To give you an example, they said, well, less than 1/4 of Americans today can name the 3 branches of government. Okay, how did they get that dumb? How did they get so ignorant? Well, the answer is, of course, that the government schools didn't teach them the 3 branches of government, and that was a deliberate operation to have the kids be ignorant of history and civics and American heritage and American history. So, in fact, the arguments that she has in favor of government schools, that they can go learn the 3 branches of government, actually show what a disaster they've been. And this is typical throughout the article. It's just incredible.
Yeah, that's like the argument that you put your money in a bank and the bank misuses that money, loses it, evaporates right from before your very eyes. And then the Atlantic comes out and argues, this is exactly why you got to put your money in banks, because less than one in 4 Americans actually have savings accounts, right? It's the kind of goofy argument you get that it really is a parody of itself. All the arguments that these progressives make for why you should keep your kids in government schools are exactly the reasons parents are pulling them, and it never dawns on them. The liberalism in this country, progressivism in this country has become such an echo chamber that they are absolutely unable to even imagine what the other side would argue. It's all got to be just invective. It's all got to be just dismissal. This is what I think culturally. This is what's destroying the Progressive Party. This is what's causing, outside of campuses, outside of government schools, outside of Hollywood entertainment and media, I think this is what's really giving progressives and liberals a hard time, is their utter lack of ability to empathize with or even understand the arguments of middle-of-the-road Americans who just don't see it the way they do. This is how is this going to destroy them in the future, Alex?
Well, it's very clear, Duke, to go along with what you're saying, that these people live in an absolute bubble. If you read this Atlantic article as an example, they really don't address the fact that people are abandoning the government schools, one, because they're failing. The kids are becoming dumber and dumber and dumber, and this is obvious to everyone. It's shown to be true in the objective data, and because of the indoctrination. The only allusion that you have to this in the entire article is that some liberals think that government education is what do they call it, reactionary, by promoting belief in free speech and freedom of religion, and then they say, oh yeah, and some conservatives think there's a progressive bias in civics. Sorry, but that is not quite the argument that critics of government schools are making. In fact, there may be 1 or 2, fringe of the fringe of the fringe people who think that, freedom of speech and freedom of religion are reactionary. But, the overwhelming majority of parents, I think, who have lost trust in the government schools are worried that the kids are not learning anything useful, that they're being indoctrinated, that they're being harassed and bullied with this kind of racist and collectivist nonsense. And so they don't want their kids to be a part of that. And to make a reasonable argument, you have to at least acknowledge the argument of the person you're arguing against. And this Atlantic piece does not do that. I mean, it's a total failure, and it provides more evidence that these people live in an alternate reality with alternate facts. And I guess they think if they put their fingers in their ears and don't listen, that they don't have to pay attention to what we're saying. But, that's not going to work over the long run.
Well, 20, 30 years ago, our kids were getting more or less literacy. They were learning how to read, they were learning how to do basic math functions, but they were getting politicized. I think the American people were willing to put up with all that politics if their kids were getting the kind of skills that allowed them at least to make an honest living or to go get a degree that take care of them for the rest of their life. Now American moms and dads recognize that the politics is magnified tenfold, and the actual skills, the ability to become entrepreneurs, to become productive citizens is being really withdrawn from our kids because of these schools. So with you 100% on that, Alex, two really important articles. Ladies and gentlemen, go to freedomproject.com. Check out The Takeaway and all our other media. We'll keep bringing you this kind of content. We've got to make sure you've got this pipeline to see exactly what's happening to our kids day in and day out in government schools. If you enjoyed that video, I urge you to consider joining our new Patriot Club at freedomproject.com. I'm Dr. Duke. Thanks for watching.